Welcome to FO Exclusive. With me is Glenn Cole, a retired CIA officer, a senior partner at FOI, a geopolitical risk advisory company. Today we are looking at the three most important issues, or rather, I correct myself, two most important issues of the month, because the two that we've chosen are so weighty there will be no time to analyze a third. What are these two issues? Oh, and by the way, I'm Atul Singh. I'm the founder, CEO, and editor-in-chief of Fair Observer. So, what are these two issues? Number one, new twists and turns in astonishing US presidential election. Number two, warm Middle East is now getting boiling hot. So, what's happening in America? A young lad shot at Donald Trump and nicked his ear. Supporters saw Trump as literally dodging the bullet. They see this escape as a sign of God. They are convinced he's now a living martyr. Detractors, of course, see it as yet more pure dumb luck, and some of them sigh a sigh of relief that Trump was not killed, and you don't have militias out on the streets with their AR-15s. Others wish the young lad was a better shot. So you can see this is a very divided country. In any case, the bloody image of Trump with his fist clenched, two streaks of blood rolling down his cheek, and his fist clenched, saying, "Fight, fight, fight," turbocharged his campaign. To add to the Hollywood effect, the flag of the US was in the backdrop, so Trump could not have asked for a better photo op. Immediately after this miraculous escape was the Republican National Convention, and it was a coronation. The Trump family was out on stage like a tacky modern royalty. English bulldog baby dog was there on a sofa with a West Virginia governor, Jim Justice. Kid Rock performed, bearing a bit of his midriff. Hulk Hogan of World Wrestling Federation, WWF, took off his jacket and tore off his vest. Dana White of the Ultimate Fighting Championship introduced the Donald as the final speaker after a multi-day spectacle, which I must say, as a historian by training and rereading my classics, was redolent of decadent, debauched Rome in decline. So now on to an American who can play modern Roman and explain what is going on. Glenn, educate us.
Well, you forgot the detail. I think that the Republican National Committee has just announced that they're mailing by express vials of testosterone to all red-blooded males in America. And they have to make America more male. I think that's the
More
conclusion.
manly. That's just like Xi
Manly,
Jinping.
manly.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, that's just like Xi Jinping.
Right. And was it Josh Hawley or Senator his rival in pretended machismo, Hawley and gosh, his name slips my mind. Anyway, he wrote a book on manliness and how it's all declining in America. So clearly, that is
But it is
farcical as
declining. I mean, surely, come on, people no longer play ice hockey and break
no,
someone's
no, no, no,
jaw.
no, 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 no. I just had lunch with a freshman on the Harvard hockey program who is
And he
aiming to
has
play in
broken
the
jaws as
NHL.
well.
So, well, he laments that that's not allowed as freely as it was when I was a youth, generations and generations ago. Okay, enough nonsense. I mean, it's easy to be uh,
Facetious.
to make satirical and ironic comments about the Republican National Convention. Politics does get silly, but this one was particularly so. But more important, of course, is and truly a significant event in history was the near assassination of Donald Trump, a former president and the Republican presidential candidate, and the withdrawal of President Biden from the race and his replacement by the Vice President Kamala Harris, which is not only a withdrawal of a president and presidential candidate and his replacement, but whether she wins or loses, an historic shift in American political history. This withdrawal has never happened like this. We've never had a black Indian female running for president, and it has shaken up the whole dynamic of the election and what pundits have thought were certainly were the trends and was increasingly likely to have been the outcome, which would have been a Republican victory. So before I get
Certainly,
to, I think I'll start.
money is gushing in.
Oh,
Money
she's raised, I
is
think it's $300
200
million,
million
dollars,
already.
$200 million
Yeah.
in 8 days or 10 days or whatever it is like that.
Some of
Um,
it is pent up supply because donors had stopped giving Joe Biden because no one wanted to back a losing horse. And
it
now,
was so successful in a moment of apparent peak. Elon Musk, the great libertarian and proponent of free speech, he shut down a Twitter account for white dudes for Harris because it had raised so much money, and then I guess he reinstated it. But so much for his ardent embrace of free speech. He seems to have forgotten that free speech is only really intended to protect the speech that you hate, not the speech that you like. But
but you're still
okay.
buying Teslas and helping him fund Donald Trump.
Well, Trump is Trump. Musk is a fascinating topic about which we will speak another time. So let's talk about the superstructure, to use a Marxist term. First, there will be two things that I think we really need to look at, half facetiously when I say superstructure. I'm talking about the classic political considerations uh, about how Harris's replacement of Biden will and has already changed the dynamic of the election. And then the second thing I'll talk about is more sociological, and I think actually probably more important, sadly, and that's psychological aspects of a population and how they decide to vote. So let's start with some numbers: 81, 78, and 59. Uh, uh, President Biden is 81. He would have been 86 had he been reelected at the end of his term 4 years from now. Donald Trump is 78. He would be 82 or 83. But Kamala Harris, whatever else she is or is not, is 59, a generation younger, and clearly, whether one likes her or not, uh, just sort of default uh, more in tune with or perceived to be more relevant to the day-to-day, um, at least superficial cultural perspective of a large segment of America, which had been quite clearly demobilized or motivated by the fact that you had two people who were essentially 80 years old, uh, affirming that they could represent the wishes and perspectives of uh, most Americans who are much younger than they are.
In a
So that's
way,
a significant change.
Kamala represents the democratization around the world. Um, you look at India. The president is from the scheduled tribes who get reservation, meaning affirmative action. A certain percentage of seats are reserved for them in educational institutions, in government jobs. And symbolically, it was important for India to have A, a woman, and B, a woman in the Indian context of color from the forests of central India.
Mhm.
And Narendra Modi is lower caste. And we could go through one democracy after another in Europe and see the rise of people who are supposedly more representative, at least superficially, the right class, the right region, the right background. And what we are seeing is that divide between um, some wanting Donald Trump and Joe Biden, or seeing Donald Trump and Joe Biden as representatives, two old white men, and others wanting a biracial woman as the new symbol of America. So there's a lot more to play than just the candidate.
Absolutely. I mean, you put your finger, or you've uh, raised truly the central issue, not just of this campaign, this presidential race, but of the entire Trump phenomenon and the dynamics in American society and politics. We've talked about this, I think, before. Um, why is Trump successful? He represents the grievances of the power structure and class, which really are white males, who are, relatively speaking, losing. Well, not relatively speaking, who have lost utter control. And I've said this many times. Up until I was an adult, the only people who held positions of power looked like me. The only people you saw in positions of authority or prestige that one was intended to wish to emulate in the media looked like me, which meant a white male. There could be beautiful white females, but they supported the white male in his mission to make all decisions and rule the world. The world revolved around, and it did, in fact. The power structure was utterly controlled by white males. That's the way of the world everywhere in the world until my lifetime, and the end of colonization and the demographic changes in America. That's the
And
heart of the entire.
democratization.
Uh, a broader demographic
Mhm.
and the democratization, the actual realization of the American ideals, which is one man, one vote, all men and women are, and men being the term then used for human being, are created equal, endowed by their creator with certain inalienable rights. That was true for white males progressively, historically in America, and since the 1960s has become, especially since the 60s, has become progressively true in the United States. At the same time, the demographics have changed. 89% of America was white when I was born in 1956. Today, I think it's 53% is white. Within the next half dozen years, America will be a minority white population. Uh, and that is transforming into political, social, economic power, and thus you have the reaction. No group and few individuals in history have willingly given up power, and
But
that's what we're seeing. But that's
to interject there, your group, the white Anglo-Saxon Protestant, dominated America, that set forth the experiment we call America, gave away power relatively, actually very peacefully. The Supreme Court used to be a WASP club. Now there is one Protestant on the Supreme Court, and that Protestant is a black lady. So the Supreme Court has turned Catholic and Jewish, and that happened without um, firing of any gun or the wielding of any knife. Similarly, the universities, the WASP professors have given way to Jewish professors in large numbers, and professors even from India, Tamil Brahmin professors, for instance. All of this has happened without any bloody revolution, without massive social upheaval. You could argue that the change in population has caused upheaval, because why are people protesting for Palestine in campuses? It's not necessarily because they care so much about justice. They are not protesting for Sudan. It's partly because demography in campuses have changed and people feel closer to those who look like them, those who have the same faith as them. That's just human nature. And that is why you have all these Arab American kids or Muslim American kids or even African American kids who feel that they have more in common with Palestinians than, let's say, the dominant Wall Street oligarchy. And they have turned up to protest. So America has changed, but one could argue it has largely been a peaceful change.
Well, we have avoided a French Revolution and the disaggregation of society, but I think I would argue that the history of the United States has been one of strife, and up to the point of including lethal violence consistently from its outset, generally over the distribution of power and the expansion or retention of rights. Hundreds and hundreds of blacks were lynched for a century after slavery formally ended because the Southern whites continued to want to keep them in a position of vassalization, if that's a word. Um, on and on and on. You can talk about the violence, but we aren't here to talk about that today. So I will try not to go down that direction too much. But this issue, I think, really is at the heart of the Trump movement, and therefore this current election, and in part, which is why it has been viewed by so many as existential, meaning the nature of the American government and society is at stake, not just the change of a policy about interest rates. So I said 81, 78, 59. I think those are significant numbers which will change the dynamic and clearly will benefit. Already we can empirically state that evidence shows that it is benefiting Kamala Harris at present. The other number, and I won't go into too many data points here, is minus 8% or plus 8%. And what do I mean by that? Well, various polls indicated that since Donald Trump has become a national political phenomenon, um, 8% of black males had shifted from their support to the Democratic Party to supporting Trump, at least, or at least being open to it. Within 3 days of Kamala Harris's de facto replacement of Joe Biden, that 8% disappeared and returned, apparently with enthusiasm, not just resignation, to the Democratic fold and to Kamala Harris. Um, that is significant because
Which
the
poll
black
says
vote
so?
is central
Glenn, which poll
to victory.
says
I
so?
don't remember which
Okay.
polls, but I believe there was one. I don't know if it's Pew, which is the one that I trust the most.
Hmm.
But I read this in the media I respect, which is the Washington Post, New York Times. Those are the two places I most likely saw the, the reports, but it could have been Reuters or AP. I don't remember. Then let's talk about demographics, because as you touched upon, Kamala Harris's um, being the candidate changes and is central to the following issues: gender, race, age, and then we'll look at the regional electoral map on demographics of geographically. Her gender will cut both ways. I looked hard to find sources that have said that a female goes into an election at the national level suffering a 1 or 2% structural deficit, that percentage of the population is less inclined or disinclined to vote for a female. Uh, Hillary won the popular vote. If America were a true democracy and not a representative one for the states, federal system, she would have been president. So the gender clearly seems to be motivating voters, not just females, but particularly females, in favor of Kamala Harris because she is a woman. And I'll get to the specific cause, the single greatest issue that is relevant to gender in a moment. The race plays a factor. I already talked about how the data seems to show that she has, if not mobilized, at least retained the traditional support of blacks and other minorities. And her age, I touched upon. Now, the regional electoral
I'm
map.
not so sure about other minorities because Let's talk about Muslim Americans. And a number of them are not voting for anyone. In fact, I know some very eminent Muslim Americans who see Kamala as a DEI, uh, diversity, equity,
Equity and
and
inclusion.
in an inclusion hire, and they think that Kamala might have struggled because her mother was a single mom. Kamala comes from an educated family. Her grandfather was an Indian Administrative Service officer, an IAS officer, the elite of the elite of the elite. Um, he was a Tamil Brahmin, um, again, 3% of the population, but highly accomplished, highly educated. And her mother was a very intelligent woman, a scientist who worked as a cancer researcher. Her father apparently was at Stanford. So for her to play this "I'm a colored person" card is smacks of hypocrisy. And so, in addition to this feeling of this charge of hypocrisy, they also, of course, do not like Joe Biden's support for the Israeli Prime Minister Bibi Netanyahu. And so they are going to just sit it out. And there are numerous such people, and I've spoken to some of them in Michigan who are sitting it out. So Arab American support is not exactly flocking back to Kamala.
Yeah,
And
well,
the current
you're combining a couple of things. The Arab
yeah,
American, Muslim American, really,
Muslim American, sorry, my apologies.
vote
Both of them,
is
two separate. Yeah, yeah,
a separate issue,
agree.
and they are not on the whole very happy with with President Biden's staunch support of Israel since October, in particular during the Gaza war. But that's not the same issue as the
No, no,
gender
I was
or
just
the
going to
DEI
raise
issue. Yeah.
the Indian American vote. A lot of Indians think she does not identify with her Indian heritage. A lot of Indians think that she is extremely ideological because her father comes from the Nehruvian philosophy, the uh, the Jawaharlal Nehru school of thought, which was Fabian socialism, which was trusting in the state, modernizing the state, and modernizing Indian society through a colonial state. And there is
Well,
resentment. And they are supporters of Narendra Modi. The
yeah.
Gujaratis, a lot of them, are not going to vote for Kamala from hell or high water. So it's not as simple as all minorities are going to flock. There are schisms.
Well, the Indians, perhaps for these sort of narrow Indian specific perspectives, that might be the case. Although I think really the Indian vote doesn't count so much as Indian money could in an
That's true.
election.
That's true.
And the Indians are only one minority, and it's sort of almost irrelevant, I would argue, that she be Indian. But what counts is that she not be white, that she represent a minority group. Uh, and therefore, I think quite powerfully will be viewed just by her existence as proving that maybe someone who doesn't look like me can actually have an equal chance. Grossly simplifying. The DEI issue is
The
more
symbolism of
in
Kamala is huge.
yes, yeah, is more invidious than simply that she might not be qualified. This is the Republican Party's, frankly, American racists' current euphemism for a racist attack, and of her because she is female and because she is not white. The implication being that anyone who is not white and is in a position of authority has benefited by unfair advantage and is then, by extension, probably assumed to be stupid and unqualified. It's a quite pretty straightforward racist attack. Um, Independent of the merits or lack of merits and problems with respect to DEI issues. This is within 3 hours, I think literally 3 hours of her announcing and essentially replacing Biden, the quote DEI unquote attacks began, which I found to be pretty disgusting, really, but unsurprising because fundamentally the Republican Party is based on its approaches a racist appeal. So to carry on, the regional electoral map and the demographics of America will be critical. And here, Kamala's candidacy uh, cuts both ways. One would assume, and polls are corroborating, the trend of a stronger support for her among non-white populations and highly educated populations. However, those populations are concentrated geographically in states that already are likely to vote blue, meaning Democrat, meaning for Kamala Harris now, and relatively less present in swing states. And so it is possible that although uh, that Harris's candidacy might increase a quote minority unquote vote, uh, it might not benefit her or Democrats electorally in the presidential race. I don't know if that's true, but the demography of America lends some factual basis to that concern. I think it's
Glenn,
a happy problem to have, how to
very
allocate
quickly,
more votes than fewer.
yeah,
Yes.
can I explain the electoral college system to those who are not Americans here? So, America does not elect a president by popular vote. It's not that all Americans go to vote and 50% plus one becomes president. That's not the system. That's the first past the post system that operates, say, in the UK. It operates in many countries, doesn't operate in America. In America, every state is assigned electoral college, an electoral college, and every electoral college has votes. California and Texas are two big states. They have a larger number of votes, but a lot of smaller states have votes that are perhaps, or not perhaps, are certainly uh, greater than their relative uh, percentage or proportion of the American population. So, what does that mean? It means that you can win the popular vote, but lose the electoral college vote. And this has
And
happened
that's the
twice
election.
and thus the election. And this has happened twice in recent history. George Bush Jr. lost to Al Gore when it came to the number of votes, but he was the victor when it came to electoral college votes. The same held true for Donald Trump, who won fewer votes than Hillary Clinton, but won the electoral college vote. So what Glenn has been talking about is the scenario wherein Kamala Harris wins the popular vote. There is greater turnout of minorities and of women and of the Democratic base. But her candidacy upsets swing voters in the swing states who flock to Donald Trump. And so Ohio, Pennsylvania, um, Wisconsin, Michigan, Georgia, all of these swing states end up with Donald Trump. Remember, American elections now are all about swing voters in swing states. So a
So,
handful of voters decide the destiny of America. Over to you, Glenn.
so to illustrate your point, and it's a true aberration in democratic age in the American system. A vote in the state of Wyoming is 36 times more influential than a vote in California. And that's because of the allocation of electoral votes that are based on the states in part, not just the population. Wyoming has 500,000 people, California 39 million, and yet each of them has two electoral votes given to the state, independent of the populations. And so
Just hold
that
on. That's
skews.
two Senate seats, Glenn, not two electoral college votes. That's not true.
Yeah, no,
California.
no. Well, both statements are true. You get two electoral college votes per state, one for each senator, plus you get a number proportional to your population. Um, in any event, we spent too much time on this. The demographic benefit assumed, and I think likely, for Harris being a minority in this election is counterbalanced by the concentration of non-white Americans, or the concentration of white Americans in more rural states, which benefits them. So enough of that.
And
So,
there's another wrinkle, which is that it's a winner takes all for electoral college votes. So let's
mhm,
say you win 50.2% of the popular vote in Pennsylvania, you get all the electoral college votes.
right,
And let's say you win 90% in Texas and 90% in California, so you get all the California and Texas votes. So you could actually end up winning a number of these states by slim majorities. And actually, scenarios not too far off in the future, you may actually have a much smaller share of the popular vote. The name of the game is electoral college votes. That's it.
right. So uh, I've mentioned the numbers, which are really about age, the issues of gender, race, the regional electoral map, and then there are the specific issues that most people spend most time talking about in a campaign, and which are very important. And they are abortion, and the one issue uh, generally accepted that on which for which Kamala Harris has been uh, powerful and outspoken during her vice presidential years has been as an advocate for a woman's right to have an abortion or to choose, what to do with her body. And in every election, I think that has been held since the U.S. Supreme Court ended the constitutional right for an abortion. In every election, the pro-abortion candidate or position has prevailed. It is overwhelmingly supported by the American public, and in particular, American females. And Harris has been and will make in her campaign that an important part of her campaign. That would seem to benefit the Democrats. The other issue is illegal immigration on the southern border. Where 7.2 million people have illegally entered the United States since the beginning of President Biden's administration. The numbers are roughly the same. The rate of illegal people crossing the border illegally is roughly the same during the Trump years. It's actually lower now than when Trump left office. But uh, Harris was initially assigned the task of addressing this illegal immigration problem, and she gave a spectacularly failed interview, which caused her to retreat from the public eye for a while, and which tarred her as incompetent in the view of many. And this is a big issue. Now she is turning the tables because Trump, he sabotaged the Congress's and President Biden's effort to address illegal immigration. And so Harris is now turning the tables. But this is a strong argument that the Republicans will make, that there's general acceptance and concern about illegal immigration on the southern border. And this has been a negative point for the Biden administration and therefore for Harris. She's so far having some success to try to turn it around, but that will be an issue she will need to address. And then finally, on the issues point, is the economy. This is sort of it's well, they're all fascinating topic. By almost every objective measure, the U.S. economy under President Biden has been the most successful in generations in the United States and in the world since the pandemic and before. Unemployment rate, historic lows going back to the 1950s. GDP growth higher than most countries in the world. Uh, Inflation from 9% down to now 2.5%, and on and on and on. However, there is reality and there is perception. And poll after poll shows that most Americans consider the Biden administration to have failed in its management of the economy, and Republicans, meaning Donald Trump, to be more competent in its management. The facts do not support that, but facts are secondary. And Kamala Harris is the vice president of this administration, will have to somehow separate herself from or convince Americans that the economy is actually better than people perceive. But that's a tall order. People often vote their pocketbooks. So those are the issues.
On pocketbooks, Glenn, two things are hurting Americans. One is a cost of living crisis, which does not entirely show up in inflation figures, which we've covered. There was inflation. The cost of groceries has increased. It hasn't quite come down. Just because inflation has gone down, that just means the rate of price increase has gone down. There's still price increase, and people are hurting in their
Well,
pocketbooks.
wage growth has outpaced inflation, but people don't believe that to be true because for most people, inflation is the price of gasoline and the price of groceries.
Yeah,
And the perception is that,
yeah.
times are tight.
But there are other
Yeah.
things that have gone up, like rent, like childcare,
Rents are important.
like
Rents are important.
healthcare. All of these things have gone up, and
Mhm.
statistics come out of 50% of Americans having $500 in savings, and they're one paycheck away from disaster. So
Well, which
there's a
was
deeper
as
structural problem in the American
yeah,
economy,
that
and I
was
think
a literally truer statement prior to Biden's administration. But I think perception is really the issue rather than the reality, and the economic impact of the pandemic, I think, is vivid in people's minds. And I also think that people's perceptions are shaped largely by Fox News, which will is painting an apocalyptic picture,
I think
24 hours
there
a
are
day.
other. I think Fox
Um,
News is not as powerful as it once was. I think there are other media organizations. There's YouTube. There's algorithms. I think things have gotten a lot worse, and this has happened all across the world. Anyway, the US presidential elections are up in the air. We shall see what happens. We'll keep an eye on it. It's certainly, in the words of the Pentagon, a volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous world. Yes, Glenn.
Yeah, I think I talked about the issues, but I
Yeah.
actually think for all of my time, you shouldn't put the secondary issues first. I think that they are actually secondary to what will decide the election, and I think there we need to look at social psychology and the importance of narratives and myths, what people believe um, the society should be, the direction it's going, and how
So the
one
world is Jungian.
reads, yes, how one reads a candidate based on the assumptions, unconscious ones, that all of us have. And so I would argue, and I'll try to end because then we want to talk about another disaster in the Middle East, is the election will turn on what dreams Kamala Harris can inspire or not, and what dreams the Republicans, Donald Trump's campaign, can inspire. And
What nightmares can they conjure up to scare
that's exactly it.
the people?
That's exactly it. Most of our thoughts are what we no. Most of what we think are our thoughts really are our preconceptions and our hopes projected onto uh, whatever stimulus our senses tell us is happening. I don't think most people really do a lot of independent thinking about interest rates or the border. They receive what is a conventional wisdom from Fox News. I'm sorry, I think it's more influential than you do, and then they imagine that they're thinking. All of us are this way.
Or
So
CNN or
to me,
MSNBC, actually.
much smaller. I watch MSNBC, but I am not the average Joe, and the average Joe tends to watch Fox a lot more than than those liberals from lower Manhattan. So I think it comes down to whether Kamala Harris is perceived as an extremist, incompetent black woman who benefited from diversity, equity, and inclusion favoritism, or if she's perceived as Kamala Harris, a forward looking, competent advocate for all Americans, a competent black woman. And polls show so far, it's all very new, that her chances against Trump have, compared to those of Biden against Trump, have improved. Now, is this just a bump because of excitement, because it's new, or is it lasting? Time will tell. The dynamic and the characterizations on both sides are pretty clear. We all will have heard that the vice presidential candidate, J.D. Vance, has denigrated anyone who doesn't have a child and is female as a lonely, embittered, in interest, socially reclusive, childless cat lady. And on the other hand, the Democrats are going more aggressively now under Harris to paint Donald Trump as a convicted felon, a liar, and traitor. And which of these two narratives comes to dominate, I think will answer who wins the election. I think that's more important than illegal immigrants. I think it's more important than abortion, more influential in people's decision. It's the impression, the narrative into which a voter, a person, places Kamala Harris and Donald Trump, and it comes down to this impression that will determine the vote. Just as usually the taller candidate wins an election, that's true. So I think in this instance, whichever of these narratives and these national myths takes hold with 50.1% of the population will decide the election.
50.1% of the electoral college votes,
Yes,
not
well,
the
there you go.
population.
Yes, that is unfortunately correct.
Exactly. So it's a tale as old as time. Back in the day, this myth of Zeus and the myth of Jesus contended for mental space, spiritual space in Greece, ancient Greece, and we know which myths triumphed. And now we have another battle of myths. And from battle of myths in North America, we go to the Middle East, where you have the battle of myths, narratives, identities, and more. And the warm Middle East,
where all of the myths began, apparently.
Yes, not all. I come from India. I beg to disagree. We are the other place where myths began, the Gangetic Plains, Hinduism,
Right.
Buddhism, Jainism, Sikhism. I could go on. Even the first materialistic school in the world, where the philosopher said, "Yadam jivet sukham jivet rinam
Christianity
kritva
itself
kritam jivet."
well, it clearly has come from, was profoundly influenced by Buddhism, no question. So
yeah. So,
but anyway,
the translation is: as long as you live happily, take a lot of debt and drink ghee. The Italians, the Greeks, and the Southern Europeans have taken this Indian adage to heart.
Join the conversation at Fair Observer and subscribe to our YouTube channel.